Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry we're a few moments late. We were just getting set up. I am Mark Turner from Action Sustainability. I'm going to be taking you through a short webinar lunch and learn session on waste and resource efficiency. It's scheduled to last until 1:45, and then there'll be some opportunity for Q&A for anybody that wants to kind of stay on. And you can put your Q&A in. You can also do your Q&A while we're talking. But because we're using the majesty of Zoom, I won't be able to see it while I've got slides up. So unfortunately, I won't be able to answer all of your questions as we go. But I'll do my best to do that. And what we're going to cover is a basic introduction. So this is quite an entry level or a reminder level, shall we say, session. So I'll give a bit of a run through some of the relevant legislation and how that plays in. I will also talk about the financial implications of kind of inefficient waste management and resource management. And then we'll just do a short session on waste management planning and make that work. And we'll try and kind of make it as interesting as possible, because obviously some of the legislation stuff is pretty dry, to say the least. But here we go. So hopefully by the end, you'll have revisited some of the legal responsibilities you and your organisation have under waste legislation. You'll have had the opportunity to consider some things that you could do around site waste management or project waste management. And this is quite an important one. You'll be hopefully a little bit better placed than at the start of the webinar to just explain some of the concepts and requirements to other people, because this is everybody's responsibility, not just one person's responsibility to get this stuff right. Okie doke. Okay. We do ask you to participate, so unfortunately we have to kind of mute microphones and switch off cameras. But if you've got questions, you can pop them in the Q&A, and we'll answer what we have in the time available. We're going to use something called Mentimeter as well, which I will come to. But this is to do polls online, effectively just using your phone or another browser on your computer to respond to questions. You don't need to write anything down, because we're going to give you all the slides afterwards, so you'll receive all the content afterwards. So no need to bother yourself with that. We do like feedback, good, bad, or indifferent. It's very, very important for us to understand how these things are going down with the audience, and you know, what's working, what could we do differently. Tell us anything that you think works particularly well. If you could find anything from my session that works particularly well, I'd be obviously thrilled. But if you can't, it's all right. Well, we'll take it on the chin. So let's move on. So I spoke about Mentimeter, and it's worth kind of setting this one up now. So what you do, the easiest thing is go to your phone. If you put in www.menti.com, and then you'll be asked for a code. And the code in this case is 5812-8567. Please don't leave us on Zoom, because you'll kind of need the Zoom screen as well. So if you do this on a browser and end up swapping between browsers, please keep the Zoom open and don't switch us off. Okay, I shall make a start. So what is waste? Let's start by asking ourselves the question, what is waste? Well, here's the definition from the Waste Framework Directive. Thank you, EU, for that one. And it says, any substance or object that the holder discards or intends to or is required to discard. And the clue in that definition is the fact that the word discard is used twice. So that indicates perhaps, you know, that this stuff doesn't really have a particular value. Now, what we will do, of course, as we work through the webinar, is try and indicate that there is a real value to waste, and there's a real cost to being wasteful, and just begin to touch upon some of the ways in which we can work on that. But before that, I'd like you to do the first thing in terms of the Menti poll, and that's just to ask you the question, who do you think are the most important stakeholders? So a stakeholder is any person or any organization that has an interest of any kind in a topic. So who are the most important stakeholders for waste and for resource efficiency? So who cares about waste and resource efficiency? Yeah, schools certainly do these days, don't they? We're seeing it into the curriculum. Nice to see everyone in the middle. Yeah, this is taking shape nicely. You'll get a copy of this, by the way, so you can kind of use this content if anything you're doing yourselves, if you're ever doing a stakeholder exercise in your own organisation, because what it helps to show is that an enormous and very, very broad range of individuals and organisations care about bit waste and care about being more resource efficient. So while it's jumping around, we've got the end users, we've got the public, communities, manufacturers, designers, construction as a sector, certainly, site management, that really focuses in. So anybody with an interest in a site, any contractors, any suppliers, end consumers, supply chain, clients, very, very important in this area. Communities, that's a really important one, because obviously if you manage waste ineffectively, it's likely to have an adverse community impact, and that isn't going to go down well. Because we work, all of us, or have an interest in the built environment, we either supply to it or we're directly working in it. Very important to kind of maintain that community focus and think about what we're trying to achieve. So I'm really pleased with how that's developing there. So I think we've got a good list there. And what I'm going to do is move on. So thank you for that. So do I now? I think I now reshare from memory. Yep. So you can see that. Good. Okay. So we've done the stakeholders. Now, let's just talk for a moment about our waste and resource use group within the school, because we had a meeting of this group. This is a meeting of the partners of the school. Now, the school has 130 partners, 130 plus partners, all different kinds of organisations who support the activities that we undertake. And the waste and resource use group is proving really popular. We had a meeting there the other day with, I think, there were 35 people on the call, which was a real encouraging thing to see. But you find that there is an interest point and a range of intervention points right the way across the board. So if you go right the way to the very start of the process and you think about the concepts, something is going to be designed, something is going to be built, a project is going to be run. So you go right to the client and the designer and start to think about the things you can do at that point. Then when you get actually on site, if it's a construction project or if it's an FM kind of project with the program of activity, you have contractors, subcontractors and suppliers who have a very, very significant impact, because most of the built environment is delivered through a supply chain. It's not delivered directly by the prime organisation. The prime organisation will work as a facilities manager, in effect in charge, or a prime contractor, and they will bring in expert supply chains, bringing goods, materials and services to make things happen. So all the risk and all the opportunity sits there, and that's why it's so important to get this area right. And that runs right the way through to the demolition, deconstruction and demobilisation side of things. But you'll see at the bottom of this diagram that we mention a continuous link to the circular economy. And some of you may say, what on earth is the circular economy? Well, I'll attempt to explain that as we go. So here we go. So let's get into the legislation. Types of waste. Inert, bit of a moot point, sort of using the phrase inert, but let's use it anyway. So this is non biodegradable material that carries a lower landfill tax, of course, but represents a significant part of the volume of waste that can appear particularly on construction sites. Then you get into non-hazardous waste, so the non-contaminated but biodegradable materials. So you might have topsoils, you might have timber, lots of things that can actually break down, and that would kind of the stuff that would be the old phrase general waste. And then you get into hazardous waste, and hazardous waste is obviously contaminated material and harmful materials. And there's kind of a long and illustrious list of hazardous wastes, and that involves items such as oils, paints, other organic liquids, lots of other things as well. If you think about asbestos, for instance. But let's go into some of the legislation and the history of it. So if we look at the main legislation and kind of follow this through as a bit of maybe a little bit of a timeline. If we start with the Environmental Protection Act back in 1990, a key thing there is that this was the first time where you had the kind of the move from waste disposal to waste management, and that's quite interesting. So if you think about the Waste Framework Directive that I mentioned earlier on, and the phrase discard, here you get into the idea of managing that material rather than just necessarily disposing of it. And then that really kicks on if you go to 2011 and the waste regs, England and Wales. Scotland has some version. And then this is the first time that the waste hierarchy kind of came to the fore. And the waste hierarchy, if nothing else from this webinar, I'd really recommend that you take away a bit of a rethink about the principles of the waste hierarchy, and we'll get into that a bit more as we go. But it's such a crucial part of making better use of our resources if we actually really observe the waste hierarchy. The reason why it's relevant in terms of the waste regs is that for the first time it was stated that you must consider the waste hierarchy in the actions that you take. So that's built in. And you would see that on if you look at a waste transfer note, you'll see reference to it. Then we get across to environmental permitting, and of course, this is where when you want to do something different, or you want to kind of move materials, or you want to store materials, or you want to store stuff for later, anything else, it gets more complicated. And I don't intend to dig into the depths of this. There's plenty more on the school's resources and website where you can kind of read into this, but the whole kind of aspect of permitting and thinking about how you're going to make better use of those materials over time. Then we come to the hazardous waste regs. So this is kind of Wales only, but registration of premises producing hazardous waste. The WE regs, 2010. So where collection, treatment, and recovery of waste electrical equipment, and we've seen how this business has grown, and why in a resource efficiency kind of mode, if we switch that one on, you think about the material that's captured in all that waste electrical equipment, this kind of constant single use that we have, and the discarding of rare earth metals and things that could have a better life. But at the most basic kind of level, you have to work to the requirements of the WE regs. And then, of course, also in 2010, producer responsibility obligations around packaging waste kicked in, and that was the obligation to recover and recycle waste packaging, to procure PRNs and make that happen. And that's kicked on even more recently with things like the plastic packaging tax, which is going to come in April next year. I'll touch on that later on. So I'll move on. Not doing too much around this legislation side, but just giving you a bit of an overview. So real kind of, critical thing is the duty of care. So the duty of care, this in terms of waste management. So you have the producer, which is the company or individual that's produced waste in the first place. An obligation to check licenses, permits and exemptions. The consigner, and that's the employee of the producer. It's going to likely be a person, isn't it? And they're going to hand over the waste with a waste transfer note. So there's essentially important to make sure that waste transfer note is all correct and above board. Everything's working there, whether that's a physical handover or more and more these days, these things are done electronically. We can expect to see that increase more and more and more. Then you get to the carrier, and the carrier is the individual in the organisation that transports the material between the site and its final destination, or probably, in all likelihood, a further processing plant where it will be further processed and maybe split into other items. And the essential thing there, of course, is the waste carrier's licence to make sure that is up to date and appropriate and allows them to conduct the action that they're taking. And then you get to the consignee, there is the final holder, the processor of the waste, for instance, landfill or a reprocessing plant, and an environmental permit or exemption required there. Okie doke. So for getting it wrong, I won't dwell on this, but needless to say, there are lots of fines and there are lots of trip up areas, and organisations are still being fined, and directors are still getting themselves in trouble. Fixed penalty notices still being issued, and so on and so forth. And there's also the opportunity now to implement civil sanctions and enforcement undertakings where voluntary donations are made to environmental organisations. But the key to all of this is it's not the size of the fine. It's the level of the reputational damage that can be caused. Any of you that are filling in tenders will no doubt see that you're expected to declare if you've been, in almost all cases, if you've been prosecuted. You don't want to be having to tick that box. It's not a great box to be ticking when you're in a competitive environment for work. And because, as I said earlier on, any kind of construction organisation or organisation in the built environment is really only as good as its supply chain in terms of sustainability in general, and certainly in terms of waste and resource management. It's vitally important to be getting this stuff right if you do set in that supply chain. Okay, I'm just going to have a quick look in the chat. I think the EPA just came through from, most of our legislation for a long time has kind of been formed in Europe and has ended up becoming a bill here, and of course that process has now ended. But that's it. It's been a production line of legislation. What if the supplier is out of the UK? That's all right. Yes, you will get a copy of the webinar. It's actually being recorded, Carol, so that's good. Good. Okie doke. Right, we'll move on. Okay, next step. I'd like you to kind of go back to Menti, and I mentioned the waste hierarchy, and here are the 5 stages of the waste hierarchy written down. What I'd like you to answer are the following questions. Which do you think is the most sustainable option in the waste hierarchy, and which do you think is the least sustainable option in the waste hierarchy? So if you go to Menti, you'll have those 2 questions. There's no shame in getting it wrong, by the way, because this is a great way of allowing ourselves to just revisit the hierarchy, which I'll say is kind of probably the most essential thing that we have. So we've got the picture building up there very nicely in terms of the most sustainable option. And what you can see, and that is correct, so the most sustainable option in the waste hierarchy is indeed prevention. So if you can avoid the waste in the first place, if you can prevent waste from happening, that absolutely outsmarts everything else you can do. Now, of course, it's easier said than done. But if I give you a nice practical example around that, if I say something like eliminating packaging from a product, you have taken the waste out of the equation because the packaging is no longer there. You then get into the kind of prepare. So that's good to see, preparing for reuse, because if you can't eliminate altogether, can you reuse? But let's ask what do we think is the least sustainable option in the waste hierarchy? Yeah, I see this is looking good already. Yeah. So no need to say any more, really, but it's good to see that you're on with this one. So the idea of disposal of waste is, you think about the phrase that I mentioned right at the start, definition of waste, something that you intend to discard. So if you're going to discard or dispose of something, we don't have, how many landfills do you see anymore? And is that a great use of resources? No, it's not. So even sending material for recovery in some way by incineration or pyrolysis, where at least there's some carbon benefit and some of that material can be reused, albeit it's not a great option, but a very highly used option, is a better option than disposal. We want to dispose of as little as possible. And in the middle of the hierarchy, so I've covered avoiding the waste. I've covered reuse or preparation for reuse. We have recycling. So recycling sits squarely in the middle of the waste hierarchy. It's easy to kind of use recycling as the immediate go-to because it's one of the kind of easier ones to conceptually for us to get our heads around. But let's think about those other two areas. Let's think about prevention, and let's think about reuse. That's reuse of the material in its intended state. No, you can't see my screen because I haven't put it up yet. I'm just talking here, but I promise you I will now share. I'll now make you enjoy yet more slides. So here we go. Good. So hopefully there we have the slides. So there we go. So there's the waste hierarchy all nicely ordered up. And no matter what else we do, no matter what sophisticated methods we get into, and we will talk a little about circular economy, you really can't go too wrong with the waste hierarchy as a starting point. Just through your own organization and with your own suppliers, actually really investigating how this is applied will do a power of good. But I did promise I'd talk about circular economy, so I'll do that now. What I want to say about this, and this is kind of where we're going, really. We traditionally operated across the world and in the UK with a linear economy, where effectively what we do is we dig raw materials out of the ground. We either mine them or quarry them, or we grow them if they're biological materials, and those materials are then designed into products or designed into components or ingredients for products that are manufactured. Something is manufactured, it's then consumed, and then when we don't want it anymore, or it's outlived its usefulness, or we want a different color, or whatever else, we chuck it away, and it ends up in kind of the sad end of the linear economy, which is disposal. So what the circular economy does is it kind of rethinks that issue, because clearly that is not a resource efficient way of going about things. It's not a sustainable way of going about things. So what the circular economy says is that we'll take our raw materials, and right from the very off, in terms of the design process, we'll start to think about how we're going to keep those materials and the work that we put into those materials in as effective use as possible for as long as possible. So we're going to design and we're going to manufacture with sustainability in mind. So when we actually come to the consumption of that resource, whatever that resource happens to be, it's maintainable. It's not single use, for instance. It can be repaired, it can be renewed, it can be updated. There is a process for doing that. And then ultimately it will go to a recycling fate, and different components could be recycled, and that will go back into the loop for the new materials. So there it is kind of written down for you: a circular economy as an alternative to the traditional linear economy, the one I've just explained. We keep resources in use for as long as possible. We get the maximum value while they're in use, and then we recover and regenerate the products and materials at the end of each service life. So constantly getting the best out of what we have. And where is that relevant in terms of, I suppose, kind of the whole area around waste and resource use? Well, for instance, if you're part of a major development under the London Plan, so it sits within the N25, there's a requirement for all major construction projects to produce circular economy statements. Now, I've seen these and just how detailed they are. The requirements of them. They want to know how the project will enable the building materials, the components and the products to be disassembled and reused. So there's a great practical example. And what you see for London will go for other major conurbations across the UK as well. So you can fully expect these kind of principles to be uptaken over time in other parts of the UK. We've got our circular economy strategy. We've got the long-awaited UK Environment Bill, which seems to have taken forever to appear, but will appear no doubt around the time of COP26, and that's going to set a framework for increasing recycling and legal powers to things like banning the export of plastic waste to developing countries. So we have to think about how we use our own materials. So that kind of take, make, dispose approach is going to go out of fashion pretty fast. An extended producer responsibility for significant areas like packaging, where if you actually look around your sites, and if you look at your own products, you look at the stuff that arrives at your house, how much packaging is there? Is all that packaging needed? Could it be rethought? Could it be reused? Could it be eliminated altogether? Can we utilize a hierarchy against it? There are lots and lots of reasons to actually rethink the problem. Let's just look at the money side of things. So a few kind of facts here. So we're still, as a construction, demolition, excavation industry, generating a quite colossal amount of waste. Never seems to end. The landfill tax sits at nearly £97 a tonne, and that's part of the cost, that when you bring your skips on site, that's what you're paying for. Inert waste much less, obviously, but you can see how it's levered up. But it's not the biggest issue. So if you are bringing a skip on site, let's say a skip costs £300 last time I checked, that'd be a reasonable amount maybe for a skip. Work has been done, and we've got plenty of evidence of this, and some really good studies that have been taking place and are taking place to show that the true cost of waste is not the cost of the skip. The true cost of waste is much higher, and you can see on this diagram we've got a colossal figure of £2,100 of additional cost, of hidden cost that's there. So my question to you now is, what is it? So this is your third question in terms of the word cloud, which we'll now share. So give me the other contributing factors to the true cost of waste. What costs us in terms of waste? Yeah. 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 CO2. Yeah. An unused material. Yeah. You've got some stuff that you put in a skip that was probably, could have been fit for purpose. The studies tend to show this. This is really good. Getting a really good set of things here. Yeah. Health problems, administration, time, energy. Yeah. It's just resources, isn't it? We work on, I'm visiting a construction site on Friday to do some work in this, general area around, mostly around packaging. And at the moment, that site's fairly new. I know when it gets going, it's going to have 2 colossal office blocks on it. Space will be an absolute premium. All the subcontractors will be on site. There are health and safety issues around, obviously, waste. You want to reduce the need to even collect any waste at all as much as possible, because if you think in the round, it's a health and safety issue around where you're going to, and it's a storage issue, it's a logistics issue, it's a time management issue, it's a program issue, and we work to our program. So all of the reasons are there, let alone the probably reasonably fit for purpose materials that are being thrown away in skips because either they were over ordered or because people didn't find the correct fate for them. So that's a really nice list, so thanks for that, and you'll receive a copy of that. So I'll now reshare again, because I've rightly been reminded I must share my slides. Good. What's going on here? There we go. So here are some examples. So the whole process of waste management, the whole kind of industry around it, and requirement for staff and people to be trained up to do it. The storage aspect, the number of raw materials that get damaged, actual good materials that get damaged before they even actually make it into the build or into the service on behalf of the client, or they've just been, it's been misprocured, it's the wrong stuff, you bought the wrong stuff, so it's easier to skip it than send it back. Design-driven waste, has the design been thought through? Is it that same bit of plasterboard that's being chopped off all the time? Is it that same bit of timber? Is it that same end piece from that piece of piping. Whatever else, in terms of bricks, for instance, is it possible to kind of reuse the bricks that are the parts of the bricks that have been chopped, rather than just chopping a new brick every single time? Because these are the kind of habits that we see, and often it depends on if you're paying for the material. I saw recently, as a great example, in an M&E project, cabling being installed for plug sockets and lighting sockets, and there'd be about 1 meter of spare cable hanging off, and that's because they're not, maybe the contractor isn't paying for the cable. If they were paying for the cable, they would cut it off a lot shorter, and they would waste a lot less, and all of that is waste. So the wasted time, wasted labour, wasted effort, wasted money. So all I would say from this, I know it's very easy for me to say, but just have a think about the waste you produce or your organisation produces, and I guarantee you'll be able to find ways that you can cut it back. And if you start with the baseline, you can show how much you've improved, and that's, your customers want to hear about that kind of stuff. So that brings us into effective waste management on sites and so on. So why would you do it? Well, clearly you're going to take a more resource efficient approach. You're going to reduce the material wastage that's there. It's going to have the certain potential to reduce site accidents. It can only be beneficial around safety, and a key one, reduction of fly tipping, because you've got less material leaving the site, and that's a real significant, of course, reputational issue to cover. So if you're thinking about the waste management planning and you're thinking about the hierarchy, actually, do apply the waste hierarchy and start thinking at prevention. What can you do to prevent? If you can't prevent, what can you do to prepare for reuse? So reusing the same material. If you can't do any of those, what can you recycle, and how effectively and well and cleanly can you recycle that? Having already determined where the recycling is going to go. If you can't do those things, then you're into the other recovery and disposal. But try and stay in those top 3, and if at all possible, try and stay in the top 2 of the hierarchy. So here are some examples of just how you can design out waste. We do a whole kind of workshops on this for anybody that wants to join them. But the idea of value engineering, so just applying those value engineering principles to what you do. Prefabrication offsite is a great one, because you can take the process to a more manufacturing level of design and putting together what materials are going to come on site. So actually you're doing it in a cleaner environment, you're doing it in an environment that's less kind of weather affected, you're doing it in kind of factory conditions. Lots and lots of good reasons to move towards more prefabrication. And the same goes for designing to standard sizes. Quite often, the customer will not notice the difference of different sizes in things, different size architraves or whatever else it happens to be. It's very, very easy to kind of design in inefficiency. And question the spec a little bit is what I would say, and get it a little bit more standardized within the realm of customer choice. And just generally good works planning. If you have good works planning, you will prevent waste. You will prevent ordering too much of stuff, which is an absolute key when the construction industry still orders anything up to I've seen figures of anything up to 20% quoted for materials that are ordered that never get used in the build, and usually, frankly, will end up in the skip because nobody wants to own up to it. Okay, so dropping down in terms of preparing for reuse. So, you'll be familiar with the idea about pallet take back, working with aggregate crushers so that you can reuse material on site, obviously within the permits that you have, and making sure that everything works appropriately there. But there's one here mentioned, working with kind of social enterprises and materials exchange platforms. On the school, we have effectively what is a Google map of materials exchange platforms. So what is a materials exchange platform? Well, it's kind of quite a posh phrase really for just a place where unwanted materials, either construction materials or materials that come from offices and so on, can find a happier end life than being thrown away. And great examples is all the kind of community timber network stuff that's there. All of that material can be used. Building materials can be used, and there are social enterprises that are there wanting those materials so they can put in place demonstrator projects so they can give them to low-income families. There are lots and lots of ways around which that material can find a happier end point than just going in your skip. So have a think about that. Take a look at the MEP map, as we call it, on the school. You'll find it in the resources, and try and make use of that. I'm just going to have a quick look at the Q&A. Reusing some material, which costs more a lot. Yeah, it can do. Yeah, it's true. How can you overcome that? I think it's more perhaps about rationalising the design in the first place, so there is less left over, and that is a challenge, but it can be done. So I've seen loads of examples of more modular design, making sure that, for instance, the plasterboard arrives already pre-cut to the right length, making sure that packaging, excess packaging isn't required. Sophie's handily put up a link to the MEP map, so there you go. Have a click on that and have a little flick around it. It'll give you some ideas. But thanks for that question. Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, one of the big issues for waste management and segregation, space on site, and it's often where there's less space. More mistakes happen. There's greater health and safety risk, and there's more of a kind of an urge to just take stuff straight to the nearest skip and chuck it in and move away back to the job in hand. But in waste management planning, the thinking about the layout for waste management and resource management is really critical. There's no better time than at the start of a project if you can possibly get to that point. Okay, I'm going to move on. This is, excuse me, losing my voice. Hope this is helpful for you. So what can we do in terms of recycling? Have an inert skip. You clearly will have a plasterboard skip because you've got issues there anyway, and the well-established schemes for take back on plasterboard. Thinking about packaging materials. Plastics is going to be a big one. That plastics is kind of coming up the agenda quite fast at the moment. That's partly because of the plastic packaging tax, which I'll touch on shortly. But the issue there, of course, is a lot of the plastics that move through construction sites and even through a facilities management environment can end up they're not in great condition. They might have labels stuck on them. They might be dirty. They might be wet. Lots of issues. You might not know what the grade of the material is at this stage. But so although we will get better at segregating and recycling our plastic, it's just important to remember that there are actually other fates for it. We did some demonstrator work with a company recently on one of our events where they take pretty much any kind of plastic waste and they can turn it into stone boards. They can turn it into simple furniture. They can work with any plastic you can throw at them and pretty much do something with it. And it's impressive to see. Okie doke. So in terms of waste management planning, to start with, make sure that people are trained. Think about the trades, because it's not the same for every trade. Each trade will have its own issues, but it's pretty easy to quickly spot the common wastes that emerge from the different trades, and actually also see if which suppliers are taking their or subcontractors are taking their own wastes away. Notwithstanding all the kind of legislative requirements that I mentioned before, you do get responsible suppliers that will do that, and thinking about minimising waste. So you're going to work with your in-house people, but you're also going to work with all the subcontractors because everybody has an impact. And although it's no longer a legislative requirement for larger projects to have a site waste management plan, it actually makes real sense to start with a site waste management plan and do it early on and think about what's likely to happen and what you can do about it. Okie doke. So just housekeeping is a real critical area. So plan to be efficient in terms of how you're going to handle waste. Set some targets. This is really kind of critical. There's a whole, I could, probably spend an hour rambling on about targets and metrics and all the rest of it. But work out what your baseline and set some targets and actually get some reduction. Then you can turn it into a case study. Then you can share that with your clients or future clients. It's helpful stuff. Everybody wants to see that. And there's a real dearth of good data around effective waste and resource management. So anything you do will be welcome. Just plan as early as possible to be as effective as possible, and then the mistakes will be less likely to happen. And measure. So think about the quantities, the types, the disposal method, comparing your actual against your target. Check it in real time, not at the end, because if you check it at the end, obviously the mistakes have already happened. Far better to actually kind of work in real time and see how you're doing with periodic reviews, and let people know what's happening, good, bad, or indifferent. Just let people know. That communication is worth having. So you can kind of review, you can take your lessons learned, you can share your learning, you can compare your estimates to your actual. You can follow all of that path there. Very, very simple to do. There we go. Keep a real eye on this because the over ordering side of things. We are there's just, who would have thought that McDonald's would run out of milkshakes? We're in a world at the moment where resources are a bit thin on the ground and starting to cost more money. So we need to be thinking very, very hard about the efficiency of how we actually procure and what we bring on site, and making sure that we bring on site the right stuff and not the wrong stuff. And think about the packaging that's in it. Think about how that material is handled, so that even if it arrives fit for purpose, it's not then damaged. We see countless examples of this happening. Just generally wasteful practices. These are kind of common faults and things that we can address. Okay. So what we want to do really is we want to get more circular. But to do that, you start with a waste hierarchy, in my opinion. We want to keep the materials and the resources. We want to treat everything as a resource as much as possible. Keep it in use for as long as possible. Avoid waste. Order the right stuff and not the wrong stuff, order in the right quantities and not the wrong quantities, look after our materials, and stay safe. So, what I would say is, how can you help? How can we help you? Some areas to consider. The plastic packaging tax will start to have an impact if you manufacture or import plastic packaging above a certain minimum tonnage. After April 2022, which is very, very soon in real terms, HMRC will be knocking on your door or your supplier's door for a tax of £200 per tonne for any packaging, plastic packaging, that doesn't have a minimum of 30% recycled content. You'll already see the adverts on telly from some of the supermarkets or some of the personal care companies such as Unilever, where they're starting to trumpet the recycled content of their package. There's good reason behind that, and they've done it because they don't want to be paying the tax. You'll start to see that 30% becoming a pretty key figure. And one of the key issues on this is that there's a joint and several liability. This is taxes being collected by HMRC. HMRC will get their money off somebody, so if the provenance isn't there in terms of the manufacturer or importer, they will chase the next person up the value chain. So don't let that be you. So start asking your suppliers questions about 30% recycled content in plastic and what they're doing about it. That would be my advice. A few more things on the school. I've mentioned the map. So there's a nice little slide that tells you what it is and what it does. And if you've got any organisations that that could be added to this, we're very, very happy to add them. We're probably going to move towards adding some of the more kind of circular business organisations on this as well, and make it a kind of a more all-round circularity map. So we're quite excited about this. You'll see there that we have an e-learning module, Introduction to Waste. There are two of these. There's the one, Introduction for Waste for construction environments. There's another one for facilities management style. So we can cover off pretty much all of the built environment there. These are really good resources to access and do. You get CPD for it. You complete a quiz. You get a certificate, all of that kind of thing. It will build on some of the things I've just brushed over today. And that takes me to the end. So it's been a whistle stop. I hope it's been reasonably informative for you. I don't see too many questions, so that's fine. You will all receive the material, and I hope it's useful to you. If you've got any further questions, come back to us. If anybody's got any further questions, you can type them in. I'll answer them now. And if not, I'll wish you well and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. I have a question just typing now. Thanks, so. Yes, I do. On learning more about designing out waste. There's some absolutely brilliant resources on the School from Zero Waste Scotland, and they're well worth a look at. So they'll give you some thought. But as I say, we also run specific workshops on this where we'll spend a couple of hours talking about the topic. So you can wait for those to come along, and we'd be more than happy to book you onto those and work with others to actually get in some of the detail. Any resources on how to coming through fast now? Yeah, on how to measure emissions, etc. Yes, there are. If you there is a DEFRA spreadsheet which contains all the factoring for different kinds of waste. I'm not saying it's the most accurate thing in the world, but it's the nearest that's available at the moment. So that will give you the CO2 emissions for waste dependent upon the fate of that waste. So for instance, whether it's open loop or closed loop recycling or whatever else, disposal, landfill, and so on, it'll give you CO2 factors. So you can Google search that one. We may even have it on the school resources. So I hope that helps, Holly. How much impact do you have? Right to repair. Good question, Toby. I think it will have a long-term impact. Obviously, it started with white goods, so right to repair is now in, and the manufacturers of white goods are expected to have them repairable in an affordable environment. This thing will take a while to bite, I think, but it's the kind of the intention to move away from a single-use mentality. So if we think about, hand tools and, stuff that we use in the industry, or, if we're in a facilities management environment, if you're using cleaners or hoovers, can they be repairable? They should be repairable. So I think we'll see right to repair start to bite in that area. And, I'll personally, I think I welcome it, because that would be a good thing to have, wouldn't it? There we are. That's just for the material. So I hope those responses that I've given are reasonably adequate. I'm going to stop sharing. Good. Any more questions? Okie doke. Right. Well, thanks, everybody. As I say, give us some feedback. I think Sophie's put the link for the feedback up, or will do maybe now. And he'll probably send you that when we send you out the materials afterwards. You'll get those in a PDF form, so you can make use of them. You'll get copies of the word clouds, which is nice and helpful, because it shows what people are thinking. And just have a great afternoon, everybody. Or at least, or if you can't have a great afternoon, have a tolerable afternoon. Thank you.